Alrighty, so week 7 attendance. At this point, there's a couple topics I just want to briefly go over. One we've already been talking about, but keep it in mind as we move into this week, right? So remember what we're doing is creating with the form, we're reading, rendering back to the page, right? Now we haven't even talked about update and delete yet, but we've already gotten 2 down. Now this week we're going to move to both rendering the, oh, that's so funny. My new operating system on the Mac is trying to help me by thinking I'm putting thumbs up. Anyway, this week we're going to move to rendering do a table because that's a logical place for user input. User gives us input, we keep track of that input, we render it back to a table. Really makes sense. Just from the structure, so you'll learn how to do that. And in the beginning, we'll do what's called hard coding, so where we just create the output. Well, the from the inputs we create what we know would be the outputs, and then we render that into the table. So, but by the time we get to the discussion, I'll actually have you start moving to do that rendering based on the actual input of the user. And this is an important step that we're going through. So, and when I reflected upon what happened last semester with this particular discussion, there was a point that several students got frustrated. And what I've done this time, and I'm doing it in this video, is I've reorganized the written information. The video will still be from last semester, so you actually end up seeing when you watch that just the way it was before. But I want to go over it because I think it might be helpful here. And I know in some ways it's foreshadowing, right? Because you're not there yet, you're not working on it yet. So one thing you could do is either pause here and answer my last question or move ahead or come back. Might be the other way to do this is to come back once you get to the discussion and you get through the code alongs. But, note to self, if you know what I mean by that, just note this as we move into this week. So one thing I talked to Jay about, and so I've instituted, is this idea of creating a discussion board outside of the course, the grading. And you'll see it listed at the very top. And I noticed today that Jade already posted out there. And I love this idea, because we were talking about maybe using Discord for students who wanted to take what they were learning and share kind of above that. One of the things we realized in looking at the number of students on Discord is that only about half of you are there. And I've tried to encourage, but I get there's various reasons. I've heard a couple why people don't go to Discord. I'm just saying, right? That part of it. So anyway, check that out. Contribute, check it out, see what is happening. It's really a good idea to take what you've learned and take it to the next level. And even if you're not doing it, to watch somebody else do it. The thing I will say about form validation, and this came up last semester, and it's really important to understand when we're using the required attribute in the input in the HTML, in some ways it's not even minimal. And minimal in this case works if we set up the form correctly so that when we hit that submit, there's a message to the user that says, hey, this is required. But it really is just a way, one technique, not a great one. But I think for a class like this, it's a nice way to at least see some simple validation, because that's what we really all along the term of learning how to get user input is we have to validate it, because we have to assume users are not going to give us good input, and we have to give them guardrails to give us good input, and the way that we do that is through validation, and we're going to end up doing some of that in the future weeks. So I just want to say, for those who have more experience, absolutely, and I may have already said this somewhere else, using the required attribute is minimal, and there are definitely ways we want to program in to our event listener or somewhere else some validation code that validates that user input. So just know that that's the case. Okay, so before I get talking about the week 7 discussion, I have put here the week 6. Do make sure you get working code from whatever your output was for week 6 as we move in. And I think it just makes it easier for students to have as close as you can get to mine. It's really, if you've named things differently, no problem. But, the idea is that you have working code and commit that saying, right, week 7 set up and ready to go. So in the reply, you could either ask questions about what I'm about to go over with the discussion, or, and this might be the other thing, because I've done this in another class and I think it's really beneficial, is that for a class like this, and maybe it's just the way I've set it up, and maybe it's just the way I grade, right? Like my goal every day, and I've done it this semester, I don't think I've missed a day this semester, is I wake up every morning and I grade. As a matter of fact, that's generally when I do all my grading, because then I have the rest of my day to do content and to do other things, meetings, family time in the evenings, right? Our schedules are different. Like I typically don't work on the weekends. I work during the week. I try to also balance that with students' needs around that. But the point of this item, this last one, is you can reply maybe, and do you have an understanding of the reason, the benefit of working ahead is that if you miss something on, let's say, a code along, I can give you that feedback and then you can fix that before the due date. And if you fix it before the due date, you get all the points. But if you fix it after the due date, you don't, because it's late. Okay, so the benefit of working ahead is just that. That's one reason. The other reason, well, that's a big one in my humble opinion. That's a big one right there. The other one is that oftentimes, and sometimes students lean into this, they think it's just the way they work best, is that the pressure of that due date makes them motivated to get the work done. I would actually say, and this again is what I've learned over my life, is that when I work ahead of a due date, then it gives me that ability to do work and then reflect on the work, so that if there's something I'd want to do different, or there's something I've learned, or maybe I got it right, then I don't have the stress of that, right? But I also get everybody works differently. Totally understand that as well. So, and maybe there's another, I'm sure there's other, because as I was reading, and I think this was in CIT 82, I did this. Yeah, it was in 82. I said, what's the benefits of working ahead? And I got some great answers. And some students saying, yes, they struggle with that. They understood it. But I just want you to know, like, do you understand the benefits of working ahead in a class like this? You could reply with that. All right, so this week as we move through the content, right? So as we move through this week's content, you have, and I've structured it differently this week, okay? I haven't published it yet, right? This was this HTML tabular data, and it's basically using a table, right? And then we basically hard code that first, and then we go back around and we introduce the idea of actually creating the elements, the table, the body, and then and that starts to get quite in depth. So we end up creating a module so that we have a JavaScript file that just has that code. And that's something really, as a project grows, it's really important to do. So those are the code along activities. And then, like I said, I'm going to go over this discussion now, but what I've done here, and I want you to see it just in the way that you'll see the week displayed, is that there is my solution to this, and I'm going to give you a path so that if you attempt it and you don't get it, right? Because here's the deal. Like, let's actually just go ahead and jump in, because I think it's worth talking about. Right, so in this, and I've actually struggled with what to name these. I almost want to call them code discussion challenges. I probably in the videos have struggled with that as well, right? So what I ended up doing here is there's actually 3 challenges you have. Create a module, and again, this video down here goes over it. This video is from last semester before I reorganized this. So create the module, and definitely recommend, this has hit a couple students last semester, is make sure you get this working before you move on to the next one, because if you're not, this can really, if you don't have the module set up, your function, you want to make sure everything works. So it's always important that you make sure once you make a change, you have working code. This just should be a part of anybody's process when coding, right? So in this case, the second one is to see if you can fix, and I talk about this in the code along, is there's an error on the heading showing up whenever when you have the user input more than once, right? So that's a challenge to see if you can do that one. Now you could use these two as commits, like if you get the first one done, you could commit that. That'd be great. I think that's a good way of doing it as well. And then now I've also given points here for each one of these. And then the third one is clearly based on the content a little more involved. But you're basically taking the idea of, instead of just rendering to the table that array of objects that we set up, to doing it from the input of the user. And so this requires us to really clearly understand as best we can that process of rendering, okay? And so I give you some approaches, but the idea is you want to update the render to output the user input, right? And to output the user input. So the user's inputting to your form, you're capturing that into an array of objects, and now your code is going to render that input that you've saved to the page. And in this case, I've given you some suggestions about different ways you could do it. You could do it another way, totally. There's several ways to do this, actually, right? And I've given you, again, it's going to look like a lot here. And I kind of gave you, first change the reference just to get the output. That's a certain points. And then there are two approaches to the DOM elements from the array, from the objects in the arrays. And actually what I should probably do is indent these two ideas here so that it shows under those. I think I will do that. But this part, as based on the weight, is the most important part of what you want to try to get done this week, right? Right. And then, or I even say, consider doing something. Oh no, actually you have to also consider how you're going to append. Okay. So now in this case, I'm assuming this path is that you actually, and this is why I put here, my attempt at the code before reviewing any other student's code or any other solution, right? So you do that commit, right? So now the question is, what path? Did you get working code? Or did you not get working code? Because that's the other thing I realize in reworking this, is because I'm giving students a path if they want to view my solution, right? But you still have to attempt the code to get all the points. So you have to attempt the code to the best of your ability, right? And then you can watch the solution, get it coded up, and then come back and talk about what you learned from watching that. And based on how much of an attempt you did, that's how I'll grade that particular work, right? And for students who didn't need to watch the solution, right, give us your general approach. You did to your solution, right? And whichever path you choose, right, whichever path you select, post your URL and do 2 substantive replies by reviewing your code. And most of you at this point, and I'm just finished grading week 5, the beginning. We're in week 5 in the RL in the real world. Okay, so FYI. Most of you, I guess that's my point here, most of you are doing a fine job on starting to look at the code, because that's how I grade the replies. So in this case, my attempt has been to organize this a little bit. Now, is this a step up? Yeah, it is. It is a step up. And that's because as you code more, you want to really challenge, right? That is the idea, is that the more challenged you become, the more we learn. But the key is, and you've heard me say this, but I'm going to say it again. The time from you at least taking the time to try to understand the challenge, and actually giving yourself some thought process to attempt the challenge is really the learning process. And if you jump right to solution, right, it it's not that there's not a benefit, but there's not as much of an improvement that you will see, in my opinion. Everybody has different opinions about this particular part. I've just seen enough students who either take the time to do it or maybe don't do it, or there's a spectrum of the approaches I've seen students take at this point. And I get that it's uncomfortable not to know the answer. But what you're really doing in these code challenges, either in the code along or in the discussions here, is seeing how well you're translating the things we're learning in the code along. How well are you grasping that? And some of you, I've already heard seen some of your written comments about that you're actually taking what we're learning and you're going out to learn some more. That's great. I mean, what Jay's doing is taking that even a step further. And it's all good. Okay, so I hope that helps clarify to come back here to attendance. Okay, I hope that, right, helps clarify for you. Again, if you want to come back to this and watch this before you attempt the week 7 discussion, that'd be great. Also, reach out if you have questions about that as well. I think this is a really good transitional week as we move closer to the code reviews, right? So we're in week 7 now. So code reviews begin in week 10. So it's in a point, to see how well you're translating, get help if you need it. Very cool. So in this reply, again, I know I'm foreshadowing something you haven't done yet. But I've talked about you can reply with the benefits of working ahead or any other questions. This is a great avenue as well. I think I saw somebody start doing that when I was asking about Discord. It's like you can post questions here. Of course, that's a fine thing to do as well. All right, have a good one. Peace out.